Leave her behind. The words, sharp and dismissive, cut through the humid air of the briefing tent at Forward Operating Base Victor. They were spoken by Lieutenant Commander Rick Davies, a man whose call sign, Rhino, was less a testament to his toughness and more an accurate description of his subtlety. His frame was a monument to protein shakes and gym hours, a broad-shouldered, thick-necked caricature of a Tier 1 operator that filled the space around him with an aura of unearned certainty. The half-dozen SEALs of his fire team, Alpha 3, shuffled their feet. A few snickered into their fists. Others studied the scuffed toes of their boots with sudden, intense interest. They were complicit in the casual cruelty, their silence a form of assent. The target of the insult, Master Sergeant Anya Sharma, did not flinch. She did not look up. She did not offer so much as a tightening of her jaw. Her entire world seemed to be contained in the meticulous, almost reverent task of seating a magazine into the well of her M210 enhanced sniper rifle. The click it made was soft, but in the sudden vacuum of respect, it sounded like a gavel falling. She was a paradox in this room of giants. Where they were loud, she was silent. Where they were slabs of muscle sculpted for blunt force, she was lean and economical, every line of her body suggesting a purpose refined to its most essential form. She wore standard-issue fatigues that seemed a size too big. Her face was unremarkable, and her hair was pulled back in a simple, severe bun. She was utterly, deliberately forgettable, and that, to a man like LCDR Davies, was an unforgivable sin. He saw weakness. He saw a liability. He saw a support soldier, a REMF, who had somehow been attached to his glorious, high-stakes direct action mission. But the old general, the one who had signed off on the personnel manifest from his distant command post, had seen something else entirely. He had seen her file, and when he had looked at the grainy ID photo, he hadn't seen the unassuming woman. He had seen the posture, the way she held her shoulders, the directness of her gaze, even in a flat, bureaucratic photo. It was a stance he hadn't seen in 20 years, not since a classified operation in the snow-dusted mountains of some forgotten conflict, where Ghost of a Scout Sniper had held off an entire enemy platoon for 3 days with nothing but a rifle and a canteen of water. A ghost who had the exact same stillness. A ghost whose legend was whispered but never confirmed. If you believe that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, type silence below. Davies continued his tirade, his voice dripping with condescension as he gestured vaguely toward Anya. Look, I don't know who you are, Master Sergeant, or what favors you called in to get a front row seat, but this is the big leagues. We're moving fast, we're moving hard, and we are not, I repeat, not going to be dragging a glorified range master through 10 clicks of hostile jungle. Our objective is high-value target codenamed Scythe. He's a regional arms dealer with ties to 3 different terrorist networks. Intel places him at a fortified compound deep in the valley. We go in, we snatch him, we get out. The mission requires speed, aggression, and cohesion. Every member of my team can run a 6-minute mile with a full pack and then fight for an hour. Can you? He paused, letting the rhetorical question hang in the air like a foul smell. Anya's hands, steady and unhurried, performed a function check on her rifle's bolt. The smooth, metallic slide was the only answer he received. The silence infuriated him. It was a rejection of his authority, a denial of his entire worldview, which was built on a foundation of loud, visible strength. He mistook her discipline for fear, her professionalism for insubordination. I'm talking to you, Sergeant, he snapped. This isn't a desk job. Out there, silence gets you killed. The irony of the statement was lost on everyone, but perhaps Anya herself. She finally looked up. Her eyes were a deep, placid brown, and they met his for a fraction of a second. There was no anger in them, no fear. There was nothing at all but a calm, professional assessment. It was the look a master carpenter gives a piece of warped wood. Then, her gaze shifted past him to the topographical map projected on the screen behind him, her focus absolute. She saw the terrain, the elevation lines, the likely ambush points. She saw the mission, not the man standing in its way. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a small acknowledgement that she had heard him, and then returned her attention to her equipment, laying out 3 precisely machined rounds on a cleaning cloth. Each bullet was polished to a mirror shine, a small, deadly piece of a much larger, unspoken promise. The rest of Alpha 3 took their cue from their commander. They began their own final checks, the sounds of Velcro ripping and buckles clicking filling the tent, a noisy, chaotic counterpoint to Anya's profound stillness. They saw her as an anchor, a weight that would slow them down. They couldn't know that she was the fulcrum, the single point of stability around which their entire, fragile world was about to pivot. They couldn't know that in the coming storm, their assumptions would be the anchor, and her competence would be the only thing that kept them from drowning. The rain began to fall then, a soft patter on the canvas roof, a prelude to the deluge that was coming for them all. It was a sound that promised to wash everything away. The noise, the arrogance, and the foolish certainty of men who had never learned to respect the quiet. The insertion was, for the first hour, deceptively smooth. The helicopter's dead stick, landing in a clearing miles from the objective, was a textbook example of covert entry. The pilots killing the engines and gliding the last 100 meters to touchdown with a whisper and a prayer. Alpha 3 disembarked with the practiced efficiency of a unit that had done this 100 times. They moved into the jungle, a column of hulking shadows swallowed by the emerald gloom. Davies set a grueling pace, a deliberate and petty test for the woman he had been forced to bring along. He pushed them hard, through thick undergrowth and sucking mud, up steep, vine-choked inclines. The air was a physical weight, thick with humidity and the smell of decay. Sweat poured down their faces, stinging their eyes. Anya, positioned at the rear of the column, moved with an unnerving grace. While the seals crashed through the vegetation, their heavy packs snagging on branches, she seemed to glide. Her footsteps were silent, her breathing even and controlled. She didn't fight the jungle. She became part of it. Her head was on a constant, slow swivel, her eyes cataloging every shadow, every broken twig, every bird that took flight for the wrong reason. Davies would occasionally glance back, a smug look on his face, expecting to see her struggling, falling behind. Each time, he was met with the same image, a calm, focused operator, her rifle held at a low ready, her presence as quiet and constant as the rain that now fell in earnest. His frustration grew with every passing kilometer. His test was failing. His assumptions were being silently, methodically dismantled, and he didn't even have the wisdom to understand why. The ambush, when it came, was perfect. It was a classic L-shaped kill zone, initiated by a command-detonated IED that vaporized the lead SEAL and sent a shockwave of dirt and shrapnel tearing through the column. Immediately, the jungle erupted. The distinct, terrifying rip of multiple PCAM machine guns opened up from an elevated, fortified ridgeline to their left, while the sharp crack of rifle fire peppered their right flank. They were caught, pinned down in a riverbed that offered minimal cover. Tracers, green and deadly, stitched the air around them. Contact left. Contact left. The calls were frantic, drowned out by the cacophony of the firefight. Davies, his face spattered with mud, and something warmer, screamed orders into his comms. Get down. Return fire. Basilisk, suppress that ridge. The team's machine gunner, a giant of a man named Carter, tried to set up his M240, but the angle was wrong. The enemy was too well dug in, firing from behind rock and timber emplacements. Every time he tried to get a bead, a fresh volley of accurate fire would kick up the dirt around him, forcing him back down. The SEALs, for all their training and aggression, were trapped. Their forward momentum had been turned into a fatal liability. They were fish in a barrel. And then, the enemy's sniper opened up. The sound was different. A heavy, authoritative crack followed a split second later by the supersonic whip of the round passing inches over Davies' head. The SEAL next to him crumpled without a sound, a neat, dark hole appearing in his helmet. Panic, cold and sharp, began to creep into the edges of Davies' command voice. The enemy sniper was good. Professional. He was taking his time, picking his targets, sowing chaos. Another crack, and their radio man screamed, his pack and the precious comms gear inside it exploding in a shower of sparks and shattered plastic. They were cut off. They were being dismantled. In the heart of this maelstrom of noise and terror, Anya Sharma was an island of absolute calm. While the world dissolved into shrieking metal and desperate shouts, she moved with the slow, deliberate purpose of a watchmaker. She didn't dive for cover. She flowed into it, sliding behind a large, moss-covered boulder that gave her a stable platform and a sliver of a view toward the ridgeline. The rain plastered her hair to her face, but her eyes were clear, her expression unreadable. She unslung her M210, her movements economical, devoid of any wasted energy. She didn't seem to be in a hurry. She wasn't reacting to the chaos. She was observing it, processing it, reducing it to a series of solvable problems. Wind speed, negligible in the thick canopy. Humidity, high, affecting powder burn. Target distance, approximately 850 meters. Elevation, plus 20 degrés. While Davies was screaming into a dead radio, Anya was doing the math. She gently deployed the rifle's bipod, the legs settling into the soft earth with a quiet sigh. She pulled the bolt back, her thumb rolling a single, gleaming round from the magazine and chambering it with a soft snick. She settled behind the optic, her cheek finding the worn, familiar comfort of the stock. Through the high-powered scope, the world of chaos resolved into cold, clear geometry. She bypassed the frantic grunts, spraying and praying. She ignored the machine gun nest for a moment. She was hunting. Her first target was the one that mattered most. She scanned the ridgeline, looking not for a man, but for a signature, a flicker of movement, the glint of a lens, an unnaturally shaped shadow. And there it was, tucked into a small, cave-like opening in the rock face, almost invisible. A flicker of vapor from a hot barrel, a slight shift of a ghillie-suited form. The enemy sniper. He was lining up his next shot, his victim already chosen. Anya adjusted her elevation dial. A few clicks. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropping to a steady, rhythmic thump. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope, the crosshairs, and the target. She exhaled slowly, smoothly, and in the quiet space between heartbeats, she pressed the trigger. The recoil was a firm, familiar push against her shoulder. The rifle's report was sharp, but it was swallowed almost instantly by the larger din of the battle. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, through her scope, Anya saw the ghillie suit jerk violently, and the enemy sniper's rifle cartwheeled out of his position and clattered down the rocks. One shot, one kill. A perfect, impossible shot that no one but her even knew had happened. The immediate, targeted threat was gone. The SEALs were still being hammered by the machine guns, but the cold, calculated terror of the sniper was over. Anya's gaze shifted. Now, for the geometry problem. She chambered another round. Her scope swung left, settling on the most dominant PKM nest. The gunner was exposed for a fraction of a second as he fed a new belt of ammunition. It was all the time she needed. The rifle barked again. The gunner slumped over his weapon. The stream of tracers ceased. A stunned silence from that position. Before the assistant gunner could react, she had already acquired her third target. The second PKM nest. This one was trickier, the gunner better protected. Anya didn't aim for the man. She aimed for his weapon. Her third shot was a masterpiece of ballistic calculation. The round struck the receiver of the heavy machine gun, shattering the mechanism and sending a spray of metal fragments into the face of the operator. He screamed and fell back, clutching his eyes. The second gun went silent. In the space of less than 30 seconds, Anya Sharma had fired 3 rounds. She had surgically dismantled the enemy's command of the battlefield. And then, a profound, deafening silence fell over the valley, broken only by the drumming of the rain and the ragged, disbelieving gasps of Alpha 3. The SEALs, who had been pressed into the mud, slowly lifted their heads. They looked at the silenced ridgeline, then back at the small, unassuming figure behind the boulder. Davies stared, his mouth hanging open, his mind utterly failing to process what he had just witnessed. He had seen elite snipers before. He had seen incredible marksmanship. But this was something else. This wasn't marksmanship. It was artistry. It was a kind of brutal, lethal physics that he didn't know was possible. No way, he whispered, the words barely audible. That's not possible. Anya paid him no mind. She was already scanning the opposite flank, her rifle at the ready, her expression unchanged. The immediate threat was neutralized. Now, the mission continued. The stunned silence that had fallen over the battlefield was a fragile thing. A thin skin of disbelief stretched over a pit of renewed danger. The ambush may have been broken, but their situation was dire. 2 men down, communications gone, and their position irrevocably compromised. Every hostile force in the region would now be converging on this spot. The original mission, the capture of HVT Scythe, was a ghost, a fantasy from another lifetime that had ended 3 rifle shots ago. Davies, the loud, confident commander, was adrift. His plan was in ashes, his authority shattered by a display of competence so absolute it bordered on the supernatural. He knelt, staring at his useless radio, his mind cycling through broken protocols and dead-end options. The remaining SEALs looked at him, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion, waiting for orders that would not come. It was into this vacuum of leadership that Anya Sharma moved. She retracted the bipod on her rifle and slung it over her shoulder in one smooth, fluid motion. She moved from her covered position to Davies' side, her steps silent on the wet ground. She didn't say a word. She simply knelt beside him and held out her datapad. On the screen was a topographical map of their area, but it was overlaid with data Davies didn't recognize. Red icons showed the now neutralized enemy positions. A blue line indicated their disastrous infiltration route, and a new, green arrow pulsed with a quiet insistence, pointing away from the original objective and toward a series of steep, almost impassable ridges to the northeast. A red circle pulsed miles away along that vector, labeled simply HV-Tennersverlock. Her intel was live. While their multi-million-dollar comms suite was a smoking wreck, her unassuming tablet was still connected, still gathering data. Ambush was a diversion, she said. Her voice was low, calm, and utterly devoid of accusation. It was a statement of fact. Scythe was never at the compound. They used a firefight to cover his relocation. That's his vector. She pointed to the pulsing red circle. New exfil, she continued, her finger tracing the green arrow. Here, Ridgeline offers cover. Difficult terrain, they won't expect it. Her words were minimal, stripped of all extraneous information. Each one was a hard, polished stone of pure tactical logic. Davies stared at the screen, then at her. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by a raw, bewildered awe. The woman he had dismissed as a liability, the glorified range master, had just diagnosed the entire tactical situation, formulated a new plan, and presented it with more authority in 3 short sentences than he had managed in his entire career. The other SEALs had crept closer, drawn by her quiet gravity. They looked from their stunned commander to the woman and her glowing map. The choice was clear. They were warriors. They followed strength. And in that moment, strength was not the man with the rank on his collar. It was the woman with the plan. Davies swallowed, the sound loud in the tense quiet. He looked at the faces of his men, saw their silent consensus, and finally understood. He gave a single, jerky nod. Lead the way, Master Sergeant. The words were an admission of defeat, but also the beginning of his education. Anya simply nodded back, her focus already moving past him, past them all, to the new objective. We move now. As they began their ascent of the treacherous new route, the jungle seemed to fight them for every inch. The rain intensified, turning the steep slopes into slick, muddy waterfalls. But the team's dynamic had been fundamentally altered. There was no more grumbling, no more wasted energy. The SEALs, these titans of special operations, moved with a newfound humility and focus, their eyes constantly flicking toward the small figure at the head of their formation. Anya moved like a creature born of the mountains, her footing always sure, her path always the most efficient. She didn't just lead them. She set a rhythm, a cadence of silent, professional movement that bound them together. She was their compass and their metronome. As they crested the first ridge, a new sound began to filter through the storm, a low, guttural hum that was felt as much as heard. It grew steadily, a deep thrumming that vibrated in their bones. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a Black Hawk. This was something different, something heavier, something meaner. Suddenly, a monstrous shape broke through the low-hanging clouds. It was an AC-130 gunship, but not any model they recognized. It was painted a flat, non-reflective black, and its lines were subtly different, modified with pods and antennae that bristled with unknown purpose. It flew with an unnatural stability in the turbulent air, a ghost ship sailing a sea of storms. It circled them once, its presence a terrifying, comforting blanket of overwhelming power. Davies stared, dumbfounded. No gunship was on their manifest. Air support had been explicitly denied for this mission to maintain plausible deniability. Who the hell is that? Carter, the machine gunner, breathed. Before anyone could answer, the gunship's awesome firepower was unleashed. But it wasn't an indiscriminate barrage. A stream of 30mm cannon fire, precise as a surgeon's scalpel, erupted on a ridge ahead of them, pulverizing a previously unseen enemy patrol that had been moving to intercept them. The explosions were tight, contained, and devastatingly accurate. Anya hadn't broken stride. On her wrist, a small laser designator, previously hidden under her cuff, had been active. She had been painting the targets, guiding the hand of God that circled above. The gunship made a final pass and then did something impossible. It began to descend toward a small, rocky plateau nearby, a clearing barely large enough for a small helicopter, let alone a 4-engine beast of its size. Using a combination of vectored thrust and reverse prop pitch that seemed to defy the laws of aerodynamics, the behemoth performed a STOL landing that was nothing short of miraculous, touching down in a blast of wind and rain with only meters to spare. The rear ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a dark, cavernous interior and a single figure silhouetted against the tactical lighting within. The figure was a woman, tall and severe, wearing the flight suit and insignia of a captain. She held a data pad in one hand, and her gaze swept over the bedraggled team before locking onto Anya. A flicker of something, not surprise, but confirmation, passed across her face. Her voice, when it came over the shared comms frequency that had suddenly come alive, was crisp, authoritative, and colder than the mountain air. Spectre 1 to all call signs. Confirming link up with call sign Wraith. Every SEAL flinched at the name. Wraith, a legend. A ghost story whispered in the chow halls of spec ops bases around the world. A solo operator, gender and unit unknown, credited with dozens of the most sensitive and impossible missions of the last decade. A name synonymous with mythical levels of competence. The captain, Eva Rostova, took a step down the ramp, her eyes still fixed on Anya. Mission redirected. We are now prosecuting Operation Chimera. Lieutenant Commander Davies, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. You and your men are now under the tactical command of Master Sergeant Sharma. Davies' face went pale, the blood draining from it so fast he looked like he might faint. This was a public, official, and complete evisceration of his authority. Rostova wasn't finished. She looked down at her datapad, her thumb scrolling. Let's get you up to speed, Commander, she said, her voice laced with ice. She began to read, her words falling like hammer blows. Master Sergeant Anya Sharma. Unit, 7th Special Operations Group, Task Force Aegis, a unit so classified most of SOCOM didn't know it existed. Active engagements, 312. Confirmed eliminations, Tier 1 targets. Classified. Highest recorded combat shot, 2,815 meters. In winter, during a blizzard, she paused, letting the impossibility of that statement sink in. Recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross. Twice. The Silver Star. 4 times. Mission classifications. All top secret / Tier 1. Code name, Wraith. Rostova finally looked up from the pad, her gaze boring into Davies. Master Sergeant Sharma wasn't sent to support your mission, Commander, she said, delivering the final, devastating sentence. Your mission was her insertion. The revelation hung in the air, heavier than the storm clouds. The world had been turned upside down. The SEALs, who considered themselves the apex predators of the military ecosystem, stood in stunned, humbled silence. They were not the stars of this show. They had been the delivery vehicle. Their entire high-speed, direct-action mission had been a cover story, a piece of elaborate theater designed to get one quiet woman and her rifle into the field without alerting the enemy, to her true purpose. Davies looked as if he had been physically struck. The foundation of his reality, built on a hierarchy of strength where he stood near the top, had been pulverized. He was a pawn in a game he didn't even know was being played. He looked at Anya, at this unassuming woman who was now, officially, his commander. He saw her not as she was, but as the litany of achievements Captain Rostova had just read. He saw the 2,815-meter shot. He saw the classified missions, the layers of secrecy, the quiet, terrifying competence that required no announcement. His arrogance, once a roaring fire, had been reduced to a pile of cold, wet ash. Anya, for her part, seemed completely unaffected by the dramatic reveal. While Rostova was speaking, she had been methodically stripping her rifle, cleaning the mud and water from the action with an oilcloth. Her focus was on the tools, on the task, on the mission that still lay ahead. The past, the accolades, the legend, none of it mattered. There was only the present and the objective. She finished her task, reassembled her weapon with the same practiced economy of motion, and looked at Rostova. HVT is moving southeast. Vehicle convoy. We need to cut them off at the pass, she stated simply. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. Captain Rostova nodded, her expression one of professional respect. Spectre is at your disposal, Wraith. Call the shots. Anya turned to the SEALs. Her gaze was not triumphant or gloating. It was professional. It was the look of a commander addressing her assets. Davies, she said, her tone level. Take your team. Board the gunship. We're providing overwatch. I'll be on the ground. I need a two-man team to move with me for local security and to paint targets if I go dark. You choose. The offer was a small, quiet act of grace. She could have humiliated him further, relegated him to the back of the plane. Instead, she gave him a role, a purpose. She was already rebuilding the team, reforging it around a new center of gravity. Davies, his voice raspy, pointed to two of his best men. Basilisk, Pyro, you're with the Master Sergeant. The two SEALs nodded, their expressions a mixture of awe and fierce determination. They were no longer escorting a liability. They were now the honor guard for a living legend. As they moved to board the Spectre, Davies stopped before Anya. He stood there for a moment, the rain dripping from his helmet, a broken man trying to find the words. Master Sergeant, he began, his voice thick with shame. I was wrong. What I said. There's no excuse. Anya met his gaze. For the first time, a flicker of something other than pure professionalism entered her eyes. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. Your assumptions were loud, Commander, she said, her voice quiet but clear. My competence is quiet. Today, you learned to listen. She gave a single nod, a gesture of dismissal and absolution all in one, and then turned and melted back into the jungle, her two new shadows trailing behind her, moving toward the pass where Side's convoy was unknowingly racing toward its final judgment. The legend of that day spread through the special operations community like a shockwave. It didn't travel through official channels or after-action reports, which were immediately classified at a level far above even a SEAL commander's clearance. It spread the way all true military folklore does, in hushed conversations in smoke pits, in late-night calls between teammates, in the quiet reverence of a story told over a beer at a VFW hall thousands of miles from the jungle where it happened. They called it the day it rained Wraith. The SEALs of Alpha 3, once paragons of chest-thumping pride, became the story's most fervent evangelists. They spoke of it with the zeal of converts. They talked about the ambush, the sheer, helpless terror of being pinned down by a superior force. They described the 3 shots that had fallen like thunderbolts from a clear sky, each one a perfect, impossible note in a symphony of destruction. They described the silence that followed, a silence so profound it felt like the world holding its breath. They talked about her calm, her utter and complete lack of fear in the face of chaos. They talked about the ghost gunship appearing from the storm, a chariot for a warrior queen. And they always ended the story with Captain Rostova's words that had been seared into their collective memory. Your mission was her insertion. The phrase, leave her behind, became a dark joke within SOCOM, a shorthand for catastrophic arrogance. It was a career-ending phrase, a cautionary tale whispered to new lieutenants and cocky NCOs. To tell someone they were pulling a Davies was the ultimate insult, a brand of shame that stuck. And what of Davies himself? He was not discharged. Captain Rostova, in her cold and calculating wisdom, understood that would be too easy an escape. A true lesson required more than punishment. It required transformation. Davies was reassigned. He was sent to the Naval Special Warfare Advanced Training Command, not as a Tier 1 instructor for tactics or shooting, but to teach a mandatory block of instruction for all new SEAL candidates. The course was officially titled Joint Operations and Inter-Service Culture. Unofficially, the students called it the Humility Class. The first day of every new cycle, LCDR Rick Davies would stand before a room full of young, arrogant men who looked exactly as he once had, and he would tell them a story. He told the story of FOB Victor. He told them about his pride, his prejudice, his utter, colossal failure of judgment. He described Master Sergeant Anya Sharma, her quiet demeanor, her unassuming presence. And then he would describe her actions, his voice filled with a reverence that bordered on religious awe. I saw her as a liability, he would say, his gaze sweeping over the young, confident faces. I measured her by my standards, by the size of her muscles and the volume of her voice. I assumed my way was the only way, and that assumption almost got my entire team killed. He would pause, letting the weight of his confession settle in the room. Out there, you will meet operators who do not look like you, who do not talk like you, who do not come from your world. They will be smaller, or older, or quieter. And your first instinct will be to do what I did, to dismiss them, to protect your ego. I'm telling you now, that instinct is a lie. It is a poison. The most dangerous person on any battlefield is the one who doesn't need to tell you they're dangerous. He had learned the lesson. He had been humbled, broken down, and rebuilt into something better. A leader who valued competence over bravado and respect over rank. Back at FOB Victor, long after Alpha 3 and the Spectre gunship were gone, a young sergeant found something in the mud near the boulder where Anya had made her stand. It was a single, spent brass casing from a 762 millimeters round, tarnished by the rain, but otherwise perfect. He cleaned it, polished it, and mounted it on a crude wooden plaque he hung in the main briefing tent. Underneath the solitary casing, he burned a simple inscription into the wood, a phrase that would become the FOB's unofficial motto, a piece of foundational wisdom for all who pass through. It read, Wraith 1, Assumption 0. Months hardened into a year, and the seasons turned even in the monotonous green of the jungle. FOB Victor remained, a small, muddy island of order in a sea of chaos, but its culture had undergone a profound and lasting change. The plaque with the single brass casing was no longer a crude, handmade tribute. It had been replaced by a professionally engraved brass plate mounted on polished mahogany, a permanent fixture beside the command podium in the main briefing hall. It was the first thing new arrivals saw, and the last thing they looked at before heading out on a mission. The story of the day it rained Wraith was no longer just gossip. It had become institutional folklore, a foundational parable taught to every soldier, airman, and Marine who set foot on the base. It was a mandatory part of the in-processing brief, often told by a grizzled first sergeant who claimed he had heard the shots himself that day. The legend served as a powerful vaccine against the disease of arrogance. It fostered a new, deeper respect for joint operations, a quiet understanding that the operator in the next tent, no matter their branch, their gender, or their demeanor, might just be the one who would save your life. The quiet professionals, the logisticians, the intel analysts, the mechanics, they were seen differently. They were treated with a measure of respect that hadn't existed before, an acknowledgement that competence came in many forms, and most of them were silent. The name Wraith became a symbol, a shorthand for the highest possible standard of performance. To say a plan was Wraith approved was to say it was flawless. To say a soldier had Wraith-like calm was the highest compliment one could bestow. Anya Sharma herself was never seen at FOB Victor again. She had vanished back into the classified world from which she had emerged, her work finished. There were whispers, of course. A rumor of a hostage rescue in a sub-Saharan capital, attributed to a solo operative. An unconfirmed report of a high-level enemy commander eliminated from an impossible distance in a mountain range halfway across the world. But these were just echoes, ghost stories that only reinforced her mythic status. Her true legacy wasn't in the mission she accomplished after that day, but in the change she had left behind. Her legacy was in the way a cocky young Marine lieutenant would now listen intently to the advice of a female Air Force loadmaster. It was in the way a team of Army Rangers would share their intel freely and without pride with a Navy signal specialist. It was in LCDR Davies, standing before another class of future SEALs, his voice steady and sure as he taught the most important lesson of his life, that true strength has no uniform, and real respect is earned in silence. He wasn't just teaching a class, he was honoring a debt. He was ensuring that the lesson he had learned in the rain and mud would be paid forward, saving lives in firefights that had not yet happened, on battlefields yet to be named. The true measure of a legacy is not the story that is told, but the behavior that is changed. It's not a name carved in stone, but a standard etched into the hearts of those who come after. Anya Sharma's legacy was not her astonishing kill count or her collection of medals hidden away in some classified vault. It was not the legend of the Wraith. Her true legacy was quieter, more profound. It was the ripple effect of her silent competence. It was the humility she had hammered into the pride of an elite unit, a lesson that had then propagated through an entire culture. Her legacy was the death of a dangerous assumption. It was the understanding that what you see is not what you get, that the measure of a warrior is not found in the size of their biceps or the swagger in their step, but in the stillness of their hands and the clarity of their gaze under pressure. It was the triumph of demonstrable skill over loud, superficial prejudice. Her actions that day in the jungle became a living principle, a code of conduct passed down from one generation of operators to the next. The story became a teaching tool, a moral compass for navigating the complex human terrain of modern warfare. It reminded them that the team is always more important than the individual, that respect is the currency of cohesion, and that the quiet professional, the one who seeks neither glory nor recognition, is the most valuable asset on any team. Years later, a young officer, a graduate of LCDR Davies' humility class, found himself in a situation eerily similar to the one at FOB Victor. He was leading a team, and attached to them was a quiet, unassuming Air Force combat controller who seemed out of place. The officer's men were skeptical, their doubts whispered just loud enough to be heard. But the officer, remembering the story of the Wraith, silenced them with a single look. He walked over to the quiet airman, extended his hand, and said, "Welcome to the team. What do you need from us to do your job?" In that moment, Anya Sharma's legacy was realized. It wasn't a memory, it was an action. It was a choice. It was the quiet, ongoing victory of competence over arrogance, of respect over prejudice, a victory that would echo in perpetuity long after the sound of a rifle had faded. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud ignorance and where true strength defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.